Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Makkos Daf Tesvav, Makkos 15, and we're going to start on the bottom of Yadalat Mabez, 2 lines from the bottom. And today's Daf is dedicated for a Shmir for the Chayalim, Matzal for the Shuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this 8th Sarah. Amar Rava Bar Bar Chan Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kolosa say Shekadmu Asay, Wokinolav. The Rabbi Yochanan says, any negative commandment, any law that has a positive commandment before it, you're going to get lashes for it. So first of all, as a background, the Gemara has been discussing the concept of a lav hanita klase, of a positive commandment, which basically is attached to a negative commandment and thereby fixes it. And the paradigm of this is, Torah tells us about a Korban Pesach, that you're not allowed to leave it over until the morning. But that's a prohibition. But then it says a positive commandment that if you leave it over to the morning, you have to burn it. And so therefore the positive commandment comes to repair the negative commandment. And therefore you don't get lashes in that circumstance. So comes along Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and says, okay, a lav anita glass, say you don't get lashes for. But if it is a lav shekadmu asay, where the positive commandment can exist independently, is the way Rashi explains it. It can exist independently of the negative commandment and come prior to it, then you would get lashes. And the Gemara is going to give us examples of that. So that's Rabbi Yochanan's principle. That's what Rabbi Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says on top of 15a, Amru Lo, that the others who heard this, that Rabbi Bar Chana said this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, they said to Rabbi Yochanan, did you say this? Amru Lo. Rabbi Yochanan said, I never said that. I never said you get lashes for that. You wouldn't get lashes. It's like a lavanita klase. So Amar Rabba, Ha'elokim, Amra, he said, you did say it. Uksiva v'tanina, and it's written in the pasuk, and it's learned in the in our Mishnah. So where is it written? Ksiva, because it says this is an example of a lav shekadmu asay, of a negative commandment where a positive commandment came before it, because it says about a person who is tamei that you need to send them forth from the camp. Vayishalchu min hamachaneh kol tzarov v'kol zav v'kol tamei. You have to send forth from the camp anybody who is tamei, and then it states v'lo yitamu es machanehem. And it says they cannot, so that they not make your camps tamei. And then it says in our Mishnah, Tanina abawa mitash tamei, that if you come into the temple while you're tamei, you get lashes. So we see from here, send him forth. But then there's a negative commandment. If you come in, you get tamei. And you're not allowed to come in. And so we see from here that the asay comes before, and it's independently of the los asay. And so therefore you get lashes. So if that's the case, so why does Rabbi Yochanan say he doesn't agree with this position? Why does Rabbi Yochanan say actually you get lashes, generally speaking, you don't get lashes with a lav shekadmu asay? What's the reason why Rabbi Yochanan says that? Mishum dekar ones, because he has a difficulty from the case of an ones. An ones is a situation where a man, Rahman al sexually assaults a woman. And so therefore the halacha is that he has to remain married to this woman. He pays her 50 silver coins to her father, and then he's required to be married to her, assuming she agrees. So own it, the tiny word to the bride. So own it shagiresh. Let's say the man comes along and divorces her. He's not allowed to divorce her. Let's say he does. Im Yisraelhu machzir, if he's a Jew, a regular Jew, he's supposed to remarry her, the anal loka, and then he won't get lashes. So this is a case of say alav shekidmu asay, and we see he doesn't get lashes. And him going to loka, the anal machzir, the anal machzir. If he's a going to get lashes, and he can't remarry her because he's not allowed to marry divorcee. But it says Im Yisraelhu, if he is a Yisrael, machzir v'anal loka, that he's supposed to remarry her. So that's where the assay, and the assay is independent of the law because he's supposed to remain married to her beforehand. The analoka, and he doesn't get lashes. So am I, but why wouldn't he get lashes? So wouldn't it be a case of the say that comes before the los assay, and he should get lashes? So This is therefore the reason why Rabbi Yochanan says that you don't get lashes in that case. Amar Ula, so Ula says, no. Ula says, this is not a losa say shekin muaseh. This is actually a lav shenita klaseh. That's what we'll read the Rashi. Ula says, "Hi lav shenita klaseh." This is not a lav shekin muaseh. This is actually a lav shenita klaseh. The lav l'netuke lave asa hi aseh. The lav l'netuke lave asa hi aseh lo have mitzrach u'nechtave. The with chilaso v'lomar sheisena lo yomar lo losi elisha v'nigmar motzi shema. D'chsiv beinami v'losi elisha lo yuchol l'shalcha. So Ula says this actually is not a case of a prohibition that's preceded by an assay. It's actually a prohibition. It's an assay that fixes the prohibition. And that's why you don't get lashes here. And the reason is it wasn't necessary to write Velosi Elisha that he should remain married to her because we could have learned it out from Motzi Shemra. It wasn't necessary to write it. Motzi Shemra, you could have learned it out from the Motzi Shemra. Motzi Shemra. What's the Motzi Shemra? That's the case of where a man was with his new bride on the wedding night and he claimed she was adulteress. And so then he gets lashes and he has to pay 100 silver coins. So we say, Uma Motzi Shemra. Just like the Motzi Shemra. He didn't do an actual action. That was prohibited. It was just speech. And speech, we've already learned several times in this tractate, is not an action. Ma Motzi Shemra Shal Asamaisa Amar Achmana Velosi Elisha. The Torah says he has to remain married to her. Onis L'Kol Shekin. For sure, by the case of the onis, of the assault, he has to remain married to her. So if that's the case, why does it say by an ones, why does it say it? So it's to tell us that if he did divorce her, Shem Giresh Yachtir, that he has to remarry her. And that's why he doesn't get lashes in this case, because it's a lav hanita klase. So the Gemara says, the akati ones be made to shemra lo gomer. The Gemara says, no, you really can't do that. You can't learn out the ones from the case of the motzi shemra. The eco mifrach, because we could break that limud, we could break that teaching by saying mala motzi shemra shekin local masham. Motzi shemra is a special law because by motzi shemra, in addition to the man who spread the lies having to pay, he also gets lashes, and the ones person does not get lashes. Ella, so if that's the case, so you can't learn it. So therefore, the Gemara says, no, Ella lo yomer lo sieli shabi motzi shemra v'lingmar mionis. We'll come at it from the opposite direction. It doesn't need to say it by motzi shemra that he has to remain married to her. You can learn it from an ones, uma ones she'eno local misham, just like a case of an ones, which is less than a motzi shemra, because he doesn't get lashes and he still pays. And Amar Achmana lo sieli shah. And Torah says he has to remain married to her. Motzi Shemer lo kol shekem. For sure, by the case of the Motzi Shemer, he'd have to remain married to her. V'lama nemar. So why does it say Motzi by Motzi Shemer? Ameinu inyan Motzi Shemer. If it doesn't apply to the Motzi Shemer, neo inyan ones. Reapply it back to the case of the ones. And ameinu inyan lefanav. And if we don't need it beforehand, to neo inyan. And the reason why we don't need it beforehand is because by onus it already says he has to remain married to her. So why does it say by motzi shemra? To apply to the onus, to tell us that if he divorces her, he has to remarry her, and it's a lav hanita class say. And so therefore, again, Rav Yochanan shouldn't learn out his principle of kum lav shekin moaseh. The Gemara says no, you can't do that because motzi shemra may onus nami lo gomer. You also can't learn out the case of motzi shemra from an onus. The equal mifrach, because we could break that limud by saying mala ones shekain asa maisa. Maybe the reason why he has to remain married to her by an ones is because he did an action, but by the motzi shemer he didn't do an action. Third attempt, the Gemara says, El lo yomar lo siel isha b'motzi shemer. No, it doesn't need to say it by motzi shemer that he has to remain married to her. Sharei ishtui, because she's already his wife. So lama nemar. So it's not that we learn out that she would have to remain married to him from the case of the ones. We learn it out from the fact that he's already married to her, and so therefore, Lama Nemar, why does it say it by Motzi Shemer? Remenu Inyula Motzi Shemer, Taneo Inyula Ones. Apply to the Ones. Remenu Inyula Fanav, Taneo Inyula Acharav. So, and if you don't need it before, then apply it afterwards. And so therefore that's how we, and so to teach us this law of Motzi Shemer. So the Gemara says, the Ema, that's also not a proper way. The Ema, Meinu Inyula Fanav, the Motzi Shemra, Taneu Inyula Achrav. Why do we have to say it from the fact that it's extra at Motzi Shemra, and we push it back to the case of the Ones? Maybe if we don't need it before the Motzi Shemra to say that he has to marry her, because he's already married to her, apply it after the Motzi Shemra that he can't divorce her. Taneu Inyula Achrav. And say, and so therefore, so put it after that prohibition, meaning to say, and say that the Motzi Shemra is the low lucky, to say that the Motzi Shemra himself would not get lashes because it may say the Motzi Shemra is a lav hanita klase. Gemara says inachinami. That is correct. That you could make that drasha. Va'asi ones v'gamar mineh. Yes. So right, the Motzi Shemra, you could learn it out from it. That if he in fact divorces her, he can remarry her and thereby not get lashes for divorcing her. Va'asi ones v'gamar mineh, and ones learns it out from there. So therefore, ones is also a lav hanita klase. Gemara says no, you can't do that. But my gamar mineh, how would ones be able to learn out from the Motzi Shemra? Even Kavachomer, if you want to say the ones can learn out from the Motzi Shemra by a Kavachomer, or even Mamatzino, or through a case of a Mamatzino, Boker Tov, Jeff. Or you want to, and Boker Tov, Matt, and Deborah just joined us also. Even Motzi Shemra, or even Kavachomer or Mamatzino, you could break that. You can't learn out ones from a Motzi Shemra, because you could say Mala Motzi Shemra, Shekin Lo Asa Maisa. The Motzi Shemra is a greater novelty because he didn't actually do an action there. So how can you apply it to the case of an ones where an actual ones was done? So therefore, we're on 15a, the second line. El Amarava Kol Yamav Bamod Vach there. So therefore, Rava comes along and says that which we say by an ones that he remarries her and he doesn't get lashes. The reason is it's a lav shenita klase, and because the pasuk says kol yamav, because the pasuk says he has to marry her all the day of his life, and it didn't need to write kol yamav. It just needs to say he can't divorce her. So why does it say? I'm just translating from the Rashi. Why does it say these words kol yamav? So it means that he should remarry her, and so therefore, what the pasuk is saying is amod vach there. Stand up and remarry her. And this is what it means to say. She should be his wife if he sent her forth already. And she shouldn't be sent forth as a wife, but rather it's an aseh after the lav. So it is a lav hanita aseh. Meaning to say, this can't be the basis, the reason for why Rabbi Yochanan reversed himself. Let's just summarize what we said. We start off from the beginning with a teaching in the name of Rabbi Yochanan by Rav Bar Chana, who says that if you have a positive commandment that is independent of the negative commandment comes that you could do it beforehand, you would get lashes for it. And Rabbi Yochanan, as opposed to a lava nitaka, say, or opposed to a positive commandment that comes after the negative commandment where you don't get lashes for it. When Rabbi Yochanan heard this, he said, I don't say that. And they said, yes, you did say it. And it's from a verse and from our Mishnah. From the case of coming into the temple when you're tamei. The Gemara said, well, why did Rabbi Yochanan say he didn't say it anymore? The Gemara tries to prove it from the case of an ones, a man who divorced his wife, a man who assaulted a woman, Rahman al-Tzan, and then has to marry her, that if he divorced her, he doesn't get lashes. So the assumption is that since he's supposed to remain married to her, and that's before the divorce, this is a lav shekid muaseh. But the Gemara says that's not the case. That's a lav anita klaseh. And that's what Rava says here, that this is kol yamov ba'mod v'achzer. V'chein ki yatzer Rabban Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol yamov ba'mod v'achzer. And so therefore, we go back to the principle of what we said at the beginning. The Rabbi Yochanan said that it's only a lavanita klaseh that you don't get lashes, because we haven't found the case of a positive commandment which is independent, which you would, of the prohibition, which you would get lashes for. So, Amar Papa Rava, v'halo dame laved ulav dechasima. Another question: why would Rabbi Yochanan say you get lashes for this kumba say, for a lav shekadmu say? In order to get lashes, we have a basic principle. It has to be similar to the case of Losachsham Shor B'disho, that you're not allowed to muzzle an ox, and basically just a straight prohibition. And this is not a straight prohibition, so you shouldn't get lashes for it. Amrlei, no, I'll tell you why. Mishum dekasav beirachmana asay yisera migra garad. You think to say, okay, because there's an extra positive commandment by a lav shekinmu asay, therefore you're going to say it's worse and you don't get lashes? Of course. So just because it says an extra positive commandment, that shouldn't take away the lashes from it. Gemara says, well, if that's your concept, if that's your argument, well, why in a case of what's called a lavanita klase, the prohibition that is attached to the asay, why do we say you don't get lashes? Just because there's a positive commandment afterwards, you don't get lashes? Amalei, no. Ahu and a tuke lavu da asa. No, by the lavanita klase, the reason why it's there is after the prohibition, and the reason why it's coming is to repair the lav, is to repair the prohibition, and to exempt you from lashes. So that's the reason why you don't get lashes. It's lenituke lavu da asa. It's coming to repair the prohibition. Rashi says, "Lenatekes alav me'onesh Makkos uba." It's coming to repair the prohibition from the punishment of lashes. So that's the specific reason. That's why the positive commandment is coming. So the Gemara says, "Well, hanicha lamanda amar," and this is something we're going to is going to be explained more on Amud Beis. That makes sense according to the one who says bitlo velo bitlo. So Rashi says that which you say, that since he can remarry her for the rest of his life, therefore this concept of an ones is considered a lav shenita klaseh, and he has all the time in the world to fulfill this positive commandment of remarrying her, and therefore he doesn't get lashes. That means he can always do it. That makes sense according to the one who says that by a lav anita klaseh, that once you nullify the positive commandment, that's when you become liable for the lashes. Meaning to say, let's say you have the Korban Pesach, and you left it open all night, then you have to burn it, and you don't get the lashes. But let's say you nullified the ability to burn it by eating it at that point, then you can no longer burn it. So you've lost the ability to destroy it. So once you are mevatel it, then you get the lashes. V'lo bitlo, but as long as it's not nullified, you're exempt from the lashes. So in this case, since we say you can remarry her for the rest of your life, that makes sense according to that position. But according to the one who says that if you fulfill the positive commandment, you're exempt. If you have not fulfilled it, you're liable for lashes, because the positive commandment is the repair of the negative commandment. And so therefore, the moment he violates the prohibition, he's liable for lashes. But the positive commandment can come and get rid of it. And when he comes to the court, he either fulfills the positive commandment and he's exempt, or he gets the lashes. Then you can't say, Kol Yamav Ba'amod V'achzer Kai. You can't say for the rest of his life he can remarry her and therefore he doesn't get lashes, because if he doesn't remarry her right away, he'll get the lashes. Meaning to say, at what point do the lashes kick in? Do they kick in the second you don't fulfill the positive commandment, or the second you lose the ability to fulfill the positive commandment? So according to this concept, as all of his life, kol yamav b'amod v'achser, that only works according to the one who says bitlo v'lo bitlo, but according to the one who says kimo v'lo kimo, then the reason why he's not getting lashes in that case is not because the lav anita say, but it must be because it's lav shekin muaseh. So the Gemara says, no, on the top of 15b. Who are we explaining this whole Gemara according to? We're trying to say that Rabbi Yochanan backs away from his position of lav shekin muaseh, his lashes. Midu time el Rabbi Yochanan on top of 15b. 15b. Damway Rabbi Yochanan Watana, and Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says that the whole reason is bitlu v'lo bitlu, because Amalei Rabbi Yochanan Watana Tani bitlu chayev, lo bitlu pater, because Rabbi Yochanan said about a brisa that the proper text is to say once you cancel it, you're liable, and if you don't cancel it, you're exempt. Where do we say this? The Tani Tana Kamei Rabbi Yochanan, because there was a brisa that was taught in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and the brisa said, Kol mitzvahs lo sasei sheyesh bakom asei, that the brisa said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, any negative commandment that has a positive commandment associated with it, kiyem asei sheba pater, once you fulfilled the positive commandment, you're exempt. Bito asei sheba chayev, once you nullify the positive commandment in it, you get lashes. And these are two opposite things. It should either be kiyem asei sheba pater, lo kiyem chayev, and bito, or bito asei sheba chayev lo bitel pater. But so it's saying two contradictory ideas. So we have to change the text. Amar lei, Maika Amris. So, and when the Tana said this in front of Rabbi Yochanan said to this Amora, was repeating this brisa, what are you saying? Kiyem pater lo kiyem chayev, or bitel chayev lo bitel pater. So he said, which one are you saying? And so therefore Rabbi Yochanan said, since the text is obviously wrong, Tana bitlo v'lo bitlo. So Rabbi Yochanan says, when does the prohibition kick in? Only once you nullify it. Until you nullify it, it has not kicked in. And so therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says this case of the ones is a lav hanita klase. Rabbi Shimon Lakish Amar Kimo v'lo Kimo. Rabbi Shimon Lakish says, no, that the prohibition kicks in once you immediately, as soon as you don't fulfill the positive commandment. So now we see that there's a fundamental dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about this prohibition that could be fixed by a positive commandment. At what moment does the prohibition kick in? Does it kick in the moment you destroy the possibility of ever fulfilling? When do you get lashes? The moment you destroy the possibility of ever fulfilling the positive commandment. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Or Reish Lakish, the moment you don't do the positive commandment, even though you still have the possibility to do it later on. So Gemara says, let's dig a little deeper into the nature of their dispute. But my kamiflagate, what's the nature of their dispute? Ba'asras safek kamiflagate. It's talking about, and this words are hasra, before you get a prohibition, before you get punished for prohibition, there needs to be a warning. But let's say the warning is ambiguous because you don't know when you give the warning whether or not the person will be in violation of this prohibition. So Mar Savar Hasra Safek Shema Hasra. So must be there. Rabbi Yochanan says, so basically, so in order to be liable for lashes, you need the Hasra at the moment you violate the prohibition. So let's say you warn him and there's a doubt whether or not he's going to violate it. Is this going to be considered a Hasra? So Rabbi Yochanan's of the position, Mar Savar Hasra Safek Shema Hasra. And when you warn him, if it's in doubt, it's considered to be Hasra. And so therefore, he could be of the position that the lav anita klase, if you warn him, let's say, don't leave that over until the morning, and or so if he warns him, don't leave that over, and then he violates it with an action that nullifies the ability of redoing it, so then he would get the lashes. So therefore, he would get, once he destroys the possibility, he would get the lashes. Umar Savaras Reish Lakish says, no, that's not considered to be asra. And so therefore, if you would say that the prohibition depends upon the cancellation of the positive commandment, you would never get lashes under those circumstances because it's always asra safek. And so therefore, he says the prohibition is wiped away immediately. And so therefore, the warning, when you give him at the moment of the violation of the position, is considered to be a certain asra. But they have a new principle by this prohibition that you can get an exemption from the lashes by fulfilling the positive commandment. Meaning to say, you're liable at that moment, but then the positive commandment can come and give you like a get out of lashes free card by fulfilling it. So it's a two different ways of looking at it. So the Azdu with Hamayas. So Rabbi Yochanan says, La Vanita say, he says that Asra Suffolk is Asra, and Reish Lakish says it's not Asra. And they follow their logic, which they say elsewhere. We learned Shvua She'ochel Kikar Zehayom. Let's say a person takes an oath that he says, I'm going to eat this loaf of bread today. Meaning to say, I have the whole day to eat it. And you warn him at that time, say when he takes the oath. But what if you don't eat it? You're going to get the lashes. And then the day comes along and he didn't eat it. So Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish Amri Charvayo Eino Loke. Rabbi Yochanan says you don't get lashes, and Reish Lakish says you don't get lashes. Well, why does Rabbi Yochanan say you don't get lashes? Not because it's Hasra Safek, but because Mishum Dave Lav Shem Bomaise, he says there was no action associated, it was just words. Kol Lav Shem Bomaise and Lokanolav. This is just a prohibition without words, you don't get lashes. Whereas Reish Lakish Amar Eino Loka Mishum Dave Hasra Safek. But Reish Lakish says, no, the reason why you don't get lashes because it's Hasra Safek, because we didn't know whether or not you fulfill it at that moment. And Hasra Safek, Oshma Hasra, that's not a warning. V'Travayu Aliba to Rabbi Yehuda. And both of them followed the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that if you leave over the meat from the Paschal lamb, you're exempt from lashes because it's a lav anita klase. And so, what does he exactly say? The Tanya we learned in the Brisa about the Karban Pesach. You're not allowed to leave over the Paschal lamb until the morning, and if you do, you have to burn it. The verse is coming to tell us that you have the positive commandment of burning it in fire after the prohibition of not leaving it over. Rabbi Yehuda says the positive commandment comes to tell us you don't get lashes. So how do we interpret what Rabbi Yehuda says? Rabbi Yochanan di'e kachi, time of the Baal Kasef. What's the reason why you don't get lashes? Because there's a verse. Hello, Baal Kasef, but if one would be for the verse, we would say you would get lashes. But how could it be? Okay, how could you be? You have all night to eat it. And if he warns him, it's Asra Safek. Alma Asra Safek Shema Asra. So we see it's a valid warning, even though it's a doubt. Whereas Reish Lakish Kachi, time of the Baal Kasef, a low Baal Kasef Loka, Abel Lav Shem Maisa Loka. So Reish Lakish said, no, we see that the reason is because even though it's a prohibition without an action, you would get lashes. But in this case, we have the verse. So we're going to go, God willing, into this more in tomorrow's daf. But we'll stop here. Yes, Shekoach.
Thank you.